Mara-chan had been on Kethvar for 11 days, and she had already made 3 mistakes. The first was bowing with her palms open instead of closed. The second was saying thank you to a transit driver, which apparently implied he owed her a debt. The third was eating the garnish on her plate at the orientation dinner, which turned out to be a decorative mineral and not food. She had cracked a molar. None of these things prepared her for the fourth mistake, which she had not made yet but was about to. She stood in the hallway of the Cultural Exchange Bureau, holding a folder with her new assignment printed inside. The folder was blue. Blue meant domestic placement. She had hoped for a research post, or at least something in the agricultural district where she could work with her hands and not talk to anyone. Instead, the bureau had looked at her file, 22 years old, linguistics major, no criminal record, no known allergies, no mate, no offspring, and decided she was ideal for childcare. Family Vosk, said the clerk, a middle-aged Kethvari whose throat sac hung loose and deflated in the way that meant he was bored. 3 larvae. Evening placement. You will watch them while the parents attend the Summit of Tides. 6 hours. You will be compensated at the standard exchange rate. Mara opened the folder. Inside was a photograph of the family. The father, High Minister Vosk, was tall and angular, with scales the color of wet slate. The mother, Yanara, was broader, her scales a deep copper. Between them stood 3 children, or larvae, as the Kethvari insisted on calling them, even though they looked like small, sharp-toothed people. The oldest was maybe 8. The youngest was maybe 4. All 3 had the same flat, assessing stare. What do I do if they misbehave? Mara asked. The clerk blinked his inner eyelids. They will not misbehave. They are the children of a high minister. And if they do? A long pause. The clerk's throat sac inflated slightly, then deflated. You will endure. That was the entire instruction. You will endure. Mara folded the folder under her arm and walked out into the amber afternoon light of the capital city, where the buildings were grown from living coral and the air smelled faintly of iron and warm stone. She had 6 hours to prepare. She used 5 of them sitting on her narrow bed in the exchange dormitory, reading the Kethvari childcare manual the bureau had given her. It was 40 pages long. 38 of those pages were about vocal hierarchy. The Kethvari communicated in layers. The words mattered, yes, but the volume mattered more. The pitch mattered more than that. And beneath it all, the resonance, the specific vibration of the throat sac, carried the actual meaning. A whisper could be a threat. A shout could be a greeting. And a roar. Mara read the section on roaring 3 times. A roar was a dominance display. It was not casual. It was not playful. Among adults, roaring was restricted to the warrior caste and the elder council. To roar without authorization was a criminal offense punishable by 3 years of silence, a surgical dampening of the throat sac. Among children, the rules were different. Children roared to test boundaries. It was developmental. Expected. A larva who did not roar by age 5 was considered delayed. But the children's roars were directed at caregivers as a kind of challenge. I am louder than you. I am bigger than you. Submit. The manual's advice for caregivers was simple: lower your eyes. Expose your throat. Make yourself small. Let the larva's roar wash over you and do not react. This established the hierarchy. The child roared. The caregiver submitted. The child learned that its voice had power, and the social order was preserved. Mara set the manual down. She thought about her father, who had coached high school football in Tucson for 26 years. She thought about how he used to stand on the sideline in the fourth quarter, down by 3, with the parents screaming in the bleachers, and he would just breathe. Big, slow, diaphragm-deep breaths. And then he would open his mouth and say one sentence, quiet and flat, and every kid on that field would hear it like it was spoken directly into their ear. "You are not done yet." She thought about her mother, who had raised 6 kids in a 3-bedroom house and who had once, during a thunderstorm that knocked the power out, stood in the kitchen doorway and sung, "You Are My Sunshine," at full volume until all 6 kids stopped crying. Not a performance. Just a sound big enough to fill the dark. Mara picked up the manual again. She read the section on roaring one more time. Then she closed it and went to make dinner. The Vosk residence was not large by HFY standards, but it was large by Mara's. 3 stories of living coral, pale pink veined with gray, built into the side of a ridge overlooking the Capitol. The door was a membrane that parted when you pressed your palm to it. Mara pressed her palm. The membrane shivered and opened. Inside, the air was warm and humid. The floors were smooth stone, heated from below. The walls had no decorations except for a series of carved notches near the ceiling, sound channels, Mara realized, designed to carry and amplify vocalizations throughout the house. Every room could hear every other room. There was no privacy here. Not from sound. A servant met her at the entrance. Small, grayscaled, with a deflated throat sac that marked lower caste. The servant bowed and led her to the main living chamber, where the 3 larvae were already waiting. Grak was the oldest. 8 years old, broad for his age, with slate-gray scales like his father and a jaw that was already too large for his face. He stood in the center of the room with his arms crossed and his throat sac slightly inflated, which Mara had. Learned meant he was asserting presence. "I am here. Acknowledge me." Behind him, half hidden, was Sen. 6 years old. Copper-scaled like her mother. She was watching Mara with her head tilted, one eye slightly more open than the other, the way a bird watches a worm. The youngest was Vel. 4. Small, round, with scales that hadn't settled into a color yet and shifted between gray and copper depending on the light. Vel was sitting on the floor, chewing on what appeared to be a piece of dried coral, and did not look up when Mara entered. "Good evening," Mara said. She kept her voice level. Not too loud. The manual had warned that speaking above a certain volume in the presence of larvae could be interpreted as a challenge. "My name is Mara. I'll be watching you tonight." Grak uncrossed his arms. His throat sac inflated a little more. "You are the human." "Yes." "You are small." "I am." "You have no throat sac." "I do not." Grak looked at his siblings. Sen tilted her head further. Vel bit off a chunk of coral and crunched it loudly. "How do you roar?" Grak asked. Mara considered the question. "I don't, really. Not the way you do." "Then how do you fight?" "I try not to." Grak's throat sac deflated. He looked, for the first time, genuinely confused. Not hostile. Just confused. As if she had said something that didn't parse. As if she had told him she breathed through her feet. The servant brought tea. Mara drank hers. The children drank theirs. No one spoke for 10 minutes. The house was quiet except for the sound of Vel chewing coral and the distant hum of the city outside the walls. Then the front membrane parted, and the parents walked in. High Minister Vosk was taller than he looked in photographs. Nearly 7 feet. His scales were the wet slate color Mara had expected, but up close they had a faint iridescence, like oil on water. His throat sac was large and rested against his collarbone, half inflated, which meant he was in a state of calm authority. He did not need to fill it. He was already the loudest thing in any room he entered. Yanara was beside him, broader, copper-scaled, with a throat sac that was smaller but more muscular. She carried a data slate and was still reading from it as she walked. She looked up when she saw Mara and stopped. "You are the sitter," she said. "Not a question." "Yes, ma'am." "Mara-chan. From the exchange program." Yanara looked her up and down. Her gaze stopped at Mara's throat. Flat. Bare. No sac. No resonance chamber. Just skin and muscle and a small thyroid gland doing its quiet work. "You understand the protocols," Yanara said. It was not a question either. "I've read the manual. All 40 pages. The manual covers the basics. I will cover the rest." Yanara set down the data slate. She stepped closer. She was close enough that Mara could smell her, warm mineral, like sun-heated rock. "The children will test you. This is normal. Grak will roar. Sen will watch. Vel will bite. You will not react. You will lower your eyes. You will make yourself small. Do you understand?" "Yes." "You will not raise your voice. You will not make sudden sounds. You will not." Yanara paused. She seemed to be searching for the right word. "You will not bellow. Humans are known to bellow. It is unpleasant. It carries wrong. Do not bellow." "I won't bellow," Mara said. Yanara studied her for another moment. Then she nodded, picked up the data slate, and turned to her husband. Vosk placed one large hand on each of Grak's shoulders. He leaned down. His throat sac inflated fully, and he spoke in a low, resonant rumble that Mara felt in her sternum more than heard with her ears. "Behave for the human. She is a guest in our house. You will show her courtesy." Grak's jaw worked. "Yes, father." Vosk straightened. He looked at Mara. His eyes were dark and flat and very old. "If they are difficult, you may contact us on the house frequency. But they will not be difficult. They are Vosk children." He said it the way someone might say this bridge is structurally sound. A statement of fact that was also, somehow, a warning. Then the parents left. The membrane sealed behind them. The house was quiet again. Mara turned to the 3 larvae. They turned to her. "So," she said. "What do you want to do?" Grak stared at her. Sen tilted her head. Vel spat out a piece of coral. "We will roar at you," Grak said. "Okay," Mara said. "Can we do that after I make dinner?" Mara made dinner because the servant had been dismissed with the parents and the kitchen was stocked and she needed something to do with her hands. She found a root vegetable that tasted like a sweet potato and some kind of protein that looked like tofu but had the texture of chicken. She roasted the root, sliced the protein, and made a simple sauce from a citrus fruit she found in the cold box. The children watched her cook. They stood in a row at the edge of the kitchen, 3 pairs of dark eyes tracking her movements. Grak's arms were crossed again. Sen's head was still tilted. Vel had found a new piece of coral and was gnawing it like a dog with a bone. "What is that?" Sen asked, pointing at the sauce. "Citrus reduction. It's sour and sweet. You might not like it." I will like it, Sen said, with the absolute confidence of a 6-year-old. She did not like it. She took one bite, made a face like she'd been insulted, and pushed the plate away. Vel ate everything, including the garnish, which Mara had carefully checked to make sure it was actually food this time. Grak ate in silence, methodically, without looking up. After dinner, Mara tried to find an activity. The house had no screens, no games, no toys that she could identify. The Kethvari, she had learned, did not play in the way humans understood it. They practiced. They rehearsed. They trained. Even their children's activities were structured around vocal development. Can we go outside? Mara asked. No, Grak said. It is evening. The air is cold. We will stay in. Okay. Can I read you a story? The 3 children looked at her. A story, Grak repeated. Yes. A made-up thing. Characters. Events. A beginning, middle, and end. We do not do that, Grak said. We practice resonance. Resonance. Yes. You will sit. We will vocalize. You will listen. Mara sat. She sat on the smooth stone floor of the living chamber, cross-legged, and the 3 children arranged themselves in a triangle around her. Grak in front. Sen to the left. Vel to the right, still chewing coral. This is the first tone, Grak announced. He inflated his throat sac. The sac pulsed. A low hum filled the room. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just a sound. A vibration. Mara felt it in her teeth. Sen added her tone. Higher. A fifth above Grak's. The 2 sounds wove together and the room seemed to tighten, like a drum skin being stretched. Vel added his. Not a tone, exactly. More of a wobble. A 4-year-old's approximation of a note. It was off-key and sweet, and he was clearly very proud of it. The 3 tones held for 30 seconds. Then Grak cut them off with a sharp exhale. Silence rushed back in. That was the first tone, Grak said. You will now comment. It was nice, Mara said. Very full. Grak's throat sac inflated slightly. He was pleased. The second tone is more complex. They did the second tone. And the third. And the fourth. Each one added a layer, a harmonic, a subtle shift in pitch that made Mara's inner ear itch in a way she couldn't name. It wasn't unpleasant. It was like listening to a chord resolve. Like hearing a song you'd forgotten. By the 8th tone, an hour had passed. The children were relaxed. Grak's arms were no longer crossed. Sen's head was no longer tilted. Vel had fallen asleep on the floor, coral clutched in his small hand, his scales shifting slowly from copper to gray to copper in a rhythm that matched his breathing. Mara carried Vel to the small sleeping alcove off the living chamber. She laid him down. He murmured something and curled tighter. She pulled a woven blanket over him. When she came back, Grak and Sen were watching her. You carried him, Grak said. He was asleep. You carried him, Grak said again. He said it the way he might say you walked into the fire. Not angry. Just noting something that should not have been possible. He's 4, Mara said. He's small. I carried him. Grak was quiet for a long time. Sen watched. The house hummed. And then Grak stood up. It started small. Grak stepped back from the center of the room. His feet planted wide on the stone floor. His throat sac began to inflate. Not the gentle pulse of the practiced tones. A slow, full expansion, like a balloon filling with hot air. His jaw dropped. His nostrils flared. Sen stood too. She moved to Grak's right. Her own sack began to fill. Her eyes were on Mara. Not hostile. Expectant. This is the part where you lower your eyes. This is the part where you make yourself small. Mara did not lower her eyes. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, and she looked up at Grak, and she waited. Grak's sack was fully inflated. His chest was barrel-round. His mouth was open. And then he roared. It was not a sound Mara heard. It was a sound she received. It hit her sternum first, then her ears, then the back of her skull. It was loud, not painfully loud, but full. It filled the room the way water fills a bowl. It pressed against the walls, and the walls pressed back, and the sound channels in the ceiling carried it up through the house, and Mara understood, suddenly, why the walls were built this way. The whole house was an amplifier. The roar wasn't just in the room. It was in the structure. It lasted 4 seconds. 5. 6. Grak held it, his body rigid, his sack pulsing with the effort. It was a dominance roar. A challenge. I am here. I am loud. I am the largest thing in this room. You will submit. Sen added hers. Higher, sharper, a cutting tone that layered over Grak's bass. The two roars braided together, and the sound became something architectural. A wall of noise. A declaration. They roared for 8 seconds. 10. The windows rattled. The coral walls hummed. Mara's hair moved in the sound pressure. Her eardrums ached. Her chest vibrated. And she sat there. Cross-legged. Eyes open. Hands in her lap. She did not lower her gaze. She did not expose her throat. She did not make herself small. She watched Grak roar, and she thought, you're 8. You're 8 years old, and you're doing what your father taught you. You're doing what the manual says you're supposed to do. You're testing me. You want to know if I'll break. The roar ended. Grak gasped. His sack deflated rapidly. He stood panting, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on Mara. Waiting. Waiting for her to lower her eyes. Waiting for her to bow her head. Waiting for the submission that would confirm the order of things. The larva roars. The caregiver yields. The world is correct. Mara looked at him. She looked at Sen, who had stopped roaring and was watching with wide, copper eyes. She looked at the sleeping alcove where Vel was curled up, undisturbed, the roar having washed over him like a tide over a stone. And something in Mara's chest shifted. It was not anger. It was not dominance. It was not the desire to win. It was something older than that. Something that lived in the part of her brain that remembered being small and scared in a thunderstorm and hearing her mother's voice cut through the dark like a blade through cloth. It was the part of her that remembered her father on the sideline, breathing deep, filling his lungs, and speaking one sentence that made 20 teenagers stand up straighter. It was the part of her that had spent 4 years in a linguistics program studying how sound shaped meaning, how frequency carried emotion, how the human voice was. Not a weapon but a bridge, a way to say I am here and I am not leaving and you are not alone. She stood up. Grak took a half step back. Sen's head snapped upright. Mara planted her feet. Shoulder width apart. Toes gripping the stone. She rolled her shoulders back. She dropped her weight into her hips the way her father had taught her for stability in a crowd, in a storm, in the fourth quarter when everything was falling apart. She filled her lungs. Not her chest. Her belly. Down deep, past the ribs, into the diaphragm, into the place where breath became more than air. Where it became fuel. She opened her mouth. And she roared. It was not a Kethvari roar. It had no sac to shape it, no resonance chamber to give it harmonic layers. It was not structured. It was not a tone or a frequency or a dominance code. It was a human sound. A mammal sound. A primate sound. The sound of a creature with flat teeth and forward-facing eyes and a history of walking toward the thing that scared it and screaming until the screaming became a language. It came from her gut. Low and raw and mean. Not loud, she was not louder than Grak. But it was denser. Packed. Compressed. A sound with weight behind it. The sound of a species that had looked at fire and walked into it. That had looked at the dark and lit a match. That had looked at every predator on every continent it had ever set foot on and said, with its whole chest, no. It lasted 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Mara did not count. She felt it in her jaw, in her sinuses, in the small bones of her inner ear. She felt it leave her mouth and hit the air and the air bend. The sound channels in the ceiling caught it. Carried it up. Through the walls. Through the coral. The whole house rang with it like a struck bell. Then it stopped. Silence. Mara closed her mouth. She exhaled. Her hands were shaking. Her knees were a little unsteady. She felt lightheaded, the way you do after a long sprint. She looked at Grak. Grak was staring at her. His throat sac was flat. Completely flat. Deflated to nothing. His mouth was open. His eyes were very wide. He took another step back. Sen was pressed against the wall. Her copper scales had gone pale. Her head was no longer tilted. It was pulled back, chin up, the universal posture of an animal that has just seen something large and does not want to be noticed. From the sleeping alcove, Vel stirred. He did not wake. But he rolled over, and his small face was turned toward Mara, and his lips moved in his sleep. Mara swallowed. She rubbed her throat. It ached. Sorry, she said. Her voice came out rough. Hoarse. That was, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Grak sat down. He sat down on the stone floor, right where he was, and his legs folded under him, and he sat there with his mouth open and his sack flat and his eyes fixed on Mara with an expression she could only describe as wonder. You roared, he whispered. I guess I did. You roared back. Yeah. You don't have a sack. No. You roared without a sack. Apparently. Grak was quiet for a long time. The house settled around them. The coral walls stopped humming. The sound channels went still. Then Grak did something Mara did not expect. He bowed. Not the polite, closed-palm bow of greeting. A deep bow. Head down. Eyes on the floor. The bow of submission. The bow the manual said she was supposed to give. I hear you, Grak said. His voice was very small. You are loud. You are here. I will not roar at you again. Mara's stomach dropped. No, Grak, you don't have to. I hear you, he repeated. He stayed bowed. Sen, slowly, peeled herself off the wall. She walked to Grak's side. She bowed too. Smaller. Shy. But the same shape. I hear you, Sen whispered. Mara looked at the two bowed children and felt something crack in her chest. Not pain. Something worse. Something like guilt. She had not meant to do that. She had not meant to scare them. She had not meant to become the thing in the room that they lowered their eyes to. Hey, she said. She knelt down. Slowly. So they could see her coming. Hey. Look at me. Both of you. They looked up. I'm not mad, Mara said. I'm not the boss. You don't have to bow. You don't have to be scared. I didn't want you to think I was going to leave. That's all. I just wanted you to know I wasn't leaving. Grak blinked. His throat sac pulsed. A tiny, confused pulse. You roared, he said, because you were going to stay? Yeah. That is not what roaring is for. Maybe not for you. For me, it is. Grak stared at her. Sen stared at her. The house was quiet. Then Grak's sac pulsed again. And again. And a sound came out of him, not a roar. Not a challenge. Something smaller. A low, rumbling hum. The kind of sound a cat makes when it's warm and full and safe. He was purring. Sen added her hum. Higher. Off-key. But steady. They purred at her. The two of them. On the stone floor. In the amber light. Mara sat down with them. Cross-legged again. And she let them purr. And she did not roar again. She did not need to. The summit of tides ran long. Mara knew this because the house frequency chimed 3 times with updates from the bureau, each one pushing the parents' return further back. 6 hours became 7. 7 became 8. The children ate a second meal. Vel woke up and cried and Mara held him until he stopped. Grak practiced his tones, quiet ones, small ones, the kind that didn't fill a room. Sen drew pictures on a data slate with a stylus, pictures of the house and the ridge and a small, round shape that Mara realized was meant to be her. At 9 hours and 14 minutes, the front membrane parted. Vosk walked in first. His throat sac was half inflated, carrying the residual authority of the summit. Yunara was behind him, still reading from her data slate. They both stopped in the doorway. The living chamber was quiet. The 3 children were in the sleeping alcove, all 3 curled together in a nest of woven blankets. Vel was in the middle. Grak and Sen were on either side, their breathing slow and even. And Mara was sitting on the floor beside them, her back against the wall, her head tipped forward, asleep. A data slate rested on her knee. On it, in clumsy Kethvari script, was a half-finished sentence. The first tone is the sound of being here. Yunara crossed the room in 4 strides. She checked the children. She touched each of their foreheads. She checked their sacks. She counted their breaths. Then she turned to the security panel on the wall. Playback, she said. Full evening. Audio and visual. The panel lit up. The room's recording system, standard in all ministerial homes, began to play. Vosk and Yunara watched. They watched Mara make dinner. They watched the children eat. They watched the practice tones. They watched Vel fall asleep. They watched Mara carry him to the alcove. They watched Grak's eyes when she did it. And then they watched the roar. The recording was faithful. It captured the sound as it happened. Grak's challenge. Sen's harmony. The 8 seconds of braided noise that filled the room and pressed against the walls. And then Mara. Standing up. Planting her feet. filling her lungs. And the sound she made. Yanara's hand went to her throat. Her sack flattened. Vosk went very still. His slate-gray scales lost their iridescence. He became matte. Dull. The way Kethvari scales went when the body was in shock. The recording played the roar. 3 seconds. 4. The house ringing. The sound channels carrying it up and out. And then the silence. And Grak's face. And the bow. Yanara turned off the recording. She stood in the middle of the living chamber, and her throat sac was flat, and her hands were at her sides, and her copper scales were pale. She roared, Yanara said. Yes, Vosk said. She roared back. Yes. She has no sac. She has no resonance chamber. She has no training. And she roared back. Yes. Yanara turned to him. Her eyes were wide. Vosk. That was not a dominance call. He was quiet. That was not a challenge. That was not a first tone or a fifth tone or any tone in our scale. That was, she stopped. She swallowed. That was a hunting cry. She was calling the pack. She was saying, I am here and I am the largest thing in this room and nothing touches what is mine. That is not a Kethvari sound. That is not any sound I have ever heard. That is the sound of something that eats things that roar. Vosk was still looking at the sleeping alcove. At his 3 children, curled around the small, flat-throated human who was snoring softly against the wall. She scared them, Yanara said. No, Vosk said. His voice was low. Flat. Careful. Look at them. Yanara looked. The children were asleep. Close together. Relaxed. Their sacks were deflated and still. Their breathing was deep and even. There was no tension in their small bodies. No fear. They are not scared, Vosk said. They are safe. They have never slept like that. Not with us. Not with any caregiver. Yanara looked at the children. Then at Mara. Then at the children again. She roared at them, Yanara whispered. And they went to sleep. Vosk knelt. Slowly. His large frame folding down until his eyes were level with the sleeping alcove. He looked at Grak's face. The boy's jaw was relaxed. His throat sac was flat and still. His small hands were open, palms up, the way they had been when he was a hatchling. I have been trying to get him to sleep like that for 3 years, Vosk said. 3 years of resonance therapy. Of tone correction. Of hierarchy reinforcement. And she roared at him, and he slept. Yanara lowered herself to the floor. She sat beside her husband. She looked at Mara. What is she? Yanara asked. Vosk was quiet for a long time. She is human, he said. And I think we have been wrong about them. Mara woke to the sound of chewing. She opened her eyes. The living chamber was full of pale morning light. The coral walls were pink gold. The sound channels in the ceiling were still. Vel was sitting on the floor 2 feet from her face, chewing a piece of coral. He looked at her. He chewed. He did not look away. Good morning, Vel, Mara croaked. Her throat was sore. Raw. Like she'd swallowed sand. Vel spat out a piece of coral. You roared, he said. I did. It was very loud. It was. I liked it. Mara blinked. You did. Vel nodded. He offered her the piece of coral he'd been chewing. It was wet and covered in small tooth marks. For you, he said. Mara took the coral. She did not chew it. She put it in her pocket. The membrane parted. Vosk and Yanara entered. They had clearly not slept. Vosk's sack was overinflated, the sign of a long night spent in anxious vigilance. Yanara's copper scales were dull. She was carrying the data slate. They stopped when they saw Mara awake. "Good morning," Mara said. She started to stand. Her legs were stiff from sleeping on the floor. "Remain," Vosk said. His voice was careful. Measured. The voice of a man choosing each word the way a surgeon chooses each cut. "We need to speak." Mara sat back down. Vel climbed into her lap. She was too surprised to move him. He settled in, small and warm, and resumed chewing a new piece of coral. Yanara stepped forward. She held the data slate out. On it was the security footage. The roar paused on the frame where Mara's mouth was open and her eyes were fierce and the sound was halfway out. "You did this," Yanara said. "Yes. And I'm sorry. I didn't mean to frighten them. I just..." "You did not frighten them." Mara stopped. "I didn't." Yanara set the data slate down. She knelt in front of Mara. Up close, her copper scales were warm. Her eyes were dark and deep and very tired. "You did something to them that we have not been able to do in 8 years, Yanara said. You made them feel held. Not dominated. Not ranked. Not placed in a hierarchy. Held. You roared, and they understood, in some way we do not, that you were not going anywhere. That you were the wall. That nothing was coming through you to get to them." Mara looked at Grak and Sen, who were now awake and sitting at the edge of the sleeping alcove, watching the conversation with wide, quiet eyes. "I just didn't want them to think I was scared of them," Mara said. "I didn't want them to think I was going to run." "You roared," Vosk said, "because you were staying." "Yes." Vosk and Yanara looked at each other. A long look. A look that carried years of marriage and parenting and the slow, grinding work of raising 3 children in a world that measured everything by volume. "In our culture," Vosk said, "a roar is a claim of power. It says I am above you. It establishes rank. It creates distance." He paused. "Your roar did not create distance. It closed it. You roared, and my children moved toward you. Not away." Mara thought about this. She thought about her mother in the kitchen doorway, singing into the thunder. The song wasn't loud because it was angry. It was loud because the dark was loud, and her mother was louder, and the dark needed to know. "Where I come from," Mara said, slowly, "we don't really have a word for what I did. It's not a dominance thing. It's not a rank thing. It's more like, when you're small, and it's dark, and something is making a noise, and someone you love makes a noise back. Not to fight the noise. Just to say I'm here. I hear it too. You don't have to listen to it alone." The room was quiet. Vel chewed his coral. Sen's head tilted. Not the assessing tilt. A wondering one. Grak's throat sac pulsed. Small. Gentle. "That is not what roaring is," Grak said. But his voice was soft. And he did not sound confused anymore. He sounded like he was being handed a new word for a thing he'd always felt but never had a name for. "Maybe not for you," Mara said. "But for me, it is." Yanara stood up. She looked at her husband. Vosk looked at his wife. Something passed between them. A decision. A rearrangement of a thing that had been fixed and solid for a very long time. You will come back, Yanara said. It was not a question. If you want me to. We want you to. Vosk stepped forward. He extended his hand. Not the closed palm bow. Not the open palm greeting. He extended his hand the way humans did. Palm out. Fingers up. An offering. Mara took it. His grip was warm and dry and very strong. You will be compensated at double the standard rate, Vosk said. You don't have to. You will be compensated at double the standard rate, Vosk repeated. And you will be given a house key. And you will be listed in the family registry as, he paused. He seemed to be searching for the word. As denkeeper. It is not a title we have given to a non-Kethvari before. It is not a title we have given to anyone in 400 years. Mara looked at the three children. Grak, who was watching her with an expression she could only call hope. Sen, who had stopped tilting her head and was just looking open and steady. Vel, who was in her lap, chewing coral, completely at peace. I'd like that, Mara said. 3 days later, Mara sat in the Cultural Exchange Bureau, in the same hallway where she'd received her assignment 11 days ago. The clerk was the same. Bored. Deflated sack. Filing data slates. But there was someone else in the office. A Kethvari in formal council robes, scales the deep black of old basalt, throat sack enormous and resting on his chest like a second heart. An elder. The kind of Kethvari who could roar in the high chamber and make the walls crack. He was reading a report. Mara's report. The incident report that Vosk had filed after the evening. The elder finished reading. He looked up. His eyes found Mara. You are the human, he said. His voice was a rumble. A tectonic thing. Mara felt it in her molars. Yes, sir. You roared at the children of High Minister Vosk. I roared back. They roared first. The elder's sack pulsed. You roared back. Without a sack. Without training. Without authorization. Yes. And the children submitted. They didn't submit. They went to sleep. The elder stared at her. His sack pulsed again. Slowly. Thoughtfully. I have been a member of the Elder Council for 41 years, he said. In that time, I have heard every tone, every frequency, every resonance our species can produce. I have heard the war chant of the northern clans. I have heard the lament of the drowned city. I have heard the silence, which is the loudest sound a Kethvari can make. He paused. I have never heard what you did. And I have listened to the recording 9 times. Mara said nothing. The council has reviewed the footage. We have consulted the resonance scholars. We have consulted the historians. We have consulted the theologians. Another pause. No one can identify the sound. It does not match any known vocalization in our records. It does not match any known vocalization in the records of the 11 allied species. It is, as far as we can determine, unique to your kind. It's just a yell, Mara said. It is not just a yell. The elder's voice dropped. The rumble deepened. It is a sound that made 3 Kethvari larvae feel safe enough to sleep. A sound that made the heir of House Vosk bow not in fear but in recognition. A sound that has no equivalent in 400 years of recorded vocal history. He leaned forward. What is it? Mara thought about it. She thought about her mother. Her father. The thunderstorm. The sideline. The kitchen doorway. The sound that was not a weapon and not a prayer but something in between. The sound that meant I am here and I am not leaving and you are not alone in the dark. It's a lullaby, she said. The elder blinked. A what? A lullaby. A song you sing to children to help them sleep. Except I don't sing. I yell. But it's the same idea. You make a sound big enough to fill the dark so the kid knows someone's there. The elder was quiet for a long time. His sack inflated. Deflated. Inflated. You roared at them, he said, as a lullaby. Sort of. You made a hunting cry into a lullaby. I didn't know it was a hunting cry. I just yelled. The elder sat back. He picked up the data slate. He looked at the report. He looked at Mara. He looked at the report again. I am going to reclassify the incident, he said. It will not be logged as a dominance event. It will not be logged as a threat display. It will be logged as, he paused. He seemed to be struggling with the words. As an act of care. The first interspecies act of vocal care in the history of the Dominion. Mara nodded. The elder stood. He gathered his robes. He paused at the door. The council will be watching you, he said. Not with suspicion. With interest. We have spent 400 years perfecting the roar. We have made it into a weapon, a rank, a law. And you walked in with no sack, no training, no authorization, and used it to put 3 children to sleep. He shook his head. We have a great deal to learn. He left. The clerk stared at Mara. Mara stared at the clerk. Your next assignment is Tuesday, the clerk said. Same family. Same house. They have requested you by name. Mara smiled. Good. She walked out into the amber afternoon. The city hummed around her. The coral buildings caught the light. Somewhere in the distance, a Kethvari child was practicing its tones, small and wobbly and proud. Mara walked home. Her throat still ached. She hummed as she went. Quiet. Off-key. A tune her mother used to sing in a kitchen doorway during a thunderstorm. It was not a roar. It did not need to be. It was enough. The photograph was taken on a Tuesday. It showed the Vosk residence on Ridge Street, coral walls pink-gold in the evening light. In the front of the image stood High Minister Vosk and his mate Yanara, both in formal attire, their throat sacks half inflated in the calm, steady way that meant contentment. Behind them stood Grak, 8.5 now, taller, his jaw still too big for his face. Beside him, Sen, 6.5, her head no longer tilted, her eyes steady and open. And in front, sitting on the stone step, Vel, 4.5, holding a piece of coral in one hand and a crayon in the other. And behind all of them, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and her hair in a messy bun and flour on her apron, was Mara Chan. She was not Kethvari. She had no throat sac. She had no resonance chamber. She had no place in the vocal hierarchy of the Dominion. But in the photograph, all 3 children were leaning back against her legs. Grak's hand was resting on her knee. Sen's shoulder was pressed against her hip. Vel was holding up a drawing, a crude, wobbly picture of a small, round shape with no sac and a very open mouth, standing over 3 smaller shapes, with a sound wave coming out of it that was colored in bright, aggressive yellow. Under the drawing, in Vel's unsteady script, were 2 words. Mara roars. The photograph was entered into the family registry. It was filed under the heading Den Keeper. It was the first photograph in 400 years to be filed under that heading. And in the margin, in the elder's careful, formal script, was a note. The human did not conquer the children. She did not dominate them. She did not rank them. She roared, and they slept. We do not yet understand this. We are trying. Mara saw the photograph a week later. She was in the kitchen, making dinner. The root vegetables were roasting. The protein was sliced. The citrus reduction was bubbling. Grak walked in. He stood at the edge of the kitchen, the way he had 6 months ago. But his arms were not crossed. His sack was not inflated. He was just standing. Just looking. Mara, he said. Yeah. Can we do the first tone tonight? Of course. He paused. He shifted his weight. His jaw worked. And after, he said. Can you do the other thing? The yell? Mara looked at him. The lullaby? Grak's sack pulsed. Small. Shy. Yes. The lullaby. The one that means you're staying. Mara smiled. She turned back to the stove. She stirred the sauce. The kitchen smelled like citrus and warm stone. Yeah, she said. I can do the lullaby. Grak nodded. He went to get his siblings. Mara stood in the kitchen, in the amber light, in the house that was not hers but was. She hummed. Quiet. Off-key. The tune her mother sang. The house hummed back. And she stayed. The END.